because of the pandemic. I read a report this morning from a parent who said their child's first word was mask. As we front up to the inevitable reality that this government is going to extend coronavirus restrictions into the new year for a COVID variant that, as yet, doesn't appear to have actually killed anyone or be resistant to our existing vaccine, as we stare down the barrel of authoritarian continental leaders in Europe, normalising lockdowns yet again, and we worry that one might come our way, we need to stand up for children. Children need adults. Children need people to go into bat for them. Children need looking after. And that's our job now, as the public. We cannot allow this government to write off an entire generation. Yeah, look, I think this is one of the major issues that's kind of been swept under the rug, really, the impact on kids.
Yeah, and there's that saying, isn't there, that you can judge a society by how they treat their most vulnerable. And, of course, that entails children. And I think repeatedly, we were already failing a lot of children, the most vulnerable children, I think, even before the pandemic. And some might say that was partly a result of government cuts during austerity. And there's some truth to that. But I think the lockdown really, this has been said so many times, exacerbated the social problems and all the problems that existed before society. And with children in particular, I think you're absolutely right. Often, if the child's vulnerable, what happens is they'll go into school and teachers are very good at, noticing these things, and they'll be referred to safeguarding, or they'll go into a GP for a checkup or whatever, and the GP might notice something, but all of that social contact was taken away. And what really aggravates me is when I hear, I forget her name now, but the lady who is head of the medicine, I don't know, one of the COVID people in the government. She said something along the lines of we shouldn't be doing unnecessary social contact at the moment because of this Omicron until we find out what the effects are. And I just thought, what do you count as unnecessary social contact? Because social contact is so crucial for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons is so that people close to children can see when something's going on. And actually, I think Arthur's uncle wanted to go and see him during lockdown. And he couldn't see him because it was against the lockdown rules. Is that unnecessary social contact? I just think, I really hope we never go into any form of lockdown again. We can't afford to, because the most vulnerable children in society, I believe, we've completely failed them.
Yeah, lots of you getting in touch on this as well, as you can imagine. People saying, look, hey, another vulnerable child, more candles lit, more balloons let off, but actually nothing really done. It needs sorting, Patrick. I never realised it was happening to children. That's from Paul. I think what Paul means is on this scale. There are some damning figures out there, aren't there, about the amount of children. 2,000 a day being referred to mental health services. Well, let's exacerbate that over the course of a single year. That's a huge societal problem. And children are our future at the end of the day. And that's a cliche, isn't it? Children are our future. But they actually are. And if we're creating a generation here of children who have lost a load of social contact, who have developed crippling mental health problems, who've seen the very worst elements of society, how does that benefit this country going forward? It simply does not.
Yeah, absolutely. And let us know what you think as well. We asked there at the start of the show what you think should be a fitting punishment for this kind of crime. That's something I'll be doing my monologue a bit later on as well. Arthur's granddad has spoken to The Sun this morning, and he's saying it's actually made him reconsider, whether the death penalty is a fitting punishment for this crime. So let us know your thoughts on that as well.
Indeed, lots of you are. Death penalty for murder or those who take the life of others, and that's from Eve. So look, just keep these views coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Yeah, and it was Dr. Jenny Harries. I knew I'd get there eventually. Chief Executive of the UK Security Agency. She said, we shouldn't be doing unnecessary social contact right now. That was after 14 cases of Omicron, actually. So
yes.
God knows what she thinks now. But anyway, after the break, we'll be finding out more about the circumstances surrounding the murder of Arthur Lavinia Hughes, from the court case to the vigil to the national investigation launched into the failures of the state. So stay with us for that. We'll be back.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, hundreds of people have gathered in memory of Arthur Lavinia Hughes. On Sunday afternoon, yesterday afternoon, the 6-year-old boy was murdered after a campaign of cruelty carried out by his stepmother, Emma Tustin, and father, Thomas Hughes. And balloons were released on Cranmore Road in Solihull, where he lived before he died.
Yes, well, our West Midlands reporter, Balvinda Sidhu, attended the vigil yesterday and joins us now. Good morning, Balvinda. Thank you very much. What's the scene like where you are? What have you seen so far?
Well, over the weekend and continuing throughout this morning, people have been laying flowers and leaving balloons and sweets in memory of Arthur Lavinia Hughes. This is the house where he was systematically abused before he was killed. And yesterday, one of the neighbours organised a balloon release in his memory. Hundreds of people came, and there was not a dry eye on this road. There were people who had travelled from as far afield as London and Northampton. His maternal grandmother, Madeline Halcrow, was also there. It was so upsetting to see, but, you know, people came out, they queued outside of his house to pay their respects and to show Arthur that he was loved, because one of the most sort of disturbing aspects of this case were the audio recordings played in court where Arthur can be heard crying, saying, "No one loves me, no one loves me." But here, people have been leaving messages of love. Arthur, you are loved. This story has not just affected the community here in Solihull, but across the nation. Now, there are calls. Almost 300,000 people have signed a petition asking for tougher sentencing. Thomas Hughes and Emma Tustin were sentenced on Friday. She was sent down for 29 years and he was sent down for 21 years. And, you know, you've mentioned just earlier that the grandfather of Arthur has called for tougher sentencing as well. Dominic Raab spoke on television yesterday saying the same thing. So this case has gone to the Attorney General to see, you know, whether they can be given tougher sentencing. But also a national review is underway into what happened to Arthur, which agency saw him during the time he was living here. He was only here for 3 months before he was killed. And what happened in that time. We do know that his grandmother did report it to social services, but nothing was done. They did pay a home visit, but they found no concerns. So, you know, who had contact with Arthur in that time? The government want to do a review into all of the authorities that made contact with him. You know, in the meantime, people have said on social media that they will come here to pay their respects to the little boy who was taken too soon. And of course he was a big Birmingham City football fan, and they also paid tribute to him in their game on the weekend. Other football teams have joined as well because he was a huge football fan. He loved superheroes. He loved sweets. Some people have left some sweets here in his memory. It's just a really tragic case. I mean, his mum, maternal mum, is in prison. And his father just did not protect him. And his stepmother, I mean, she can't really be called his stepmother because she was Thomas Hughes' girlfriend. I mean, they weren't married, so she was just, a woman who just wanted to remove Arthur from the family. And she went about, abusing him, and his father allowed that to happen. It's an incredibly tragic case, and the neighbours here have been speaking of their grief as well.
We've seen him a few times when he would come and play with the dog on the drive. That was before, I think, all this started to happen, and then never seen again. To look out your window and to see the house up the road and to think you're that close to somebody that could do that and be so evil is horrendous, it's heartbreaking. I don't think anybody will ever recover from it, if I'm honest. Not when you live on the road where it happened as well, because that house is going to be a constant reminder of what's happened.
The moment I came to know about it, I just couldn't sleep because that's, I think, one of the most inhuman incidents that I have seen.
We knew Arthur a little bit. He used to walk past with his dad and he was lovely. He used to come and say hello to my dogs because I've got a bit of a collection of dogs. And we just thought we'd do something with the community. We didn't think it'd get this big. We didn't know what was going on due to lockdown. We were all in our gardens, doing our lawns and whatever and tidying up. And we just never really saw what was going on. I probably saw him three times during the time he lived here, And he was always lovely and bubbly, just gave my dogs a cuddle, walked past, said hello, called him Cheeky, because I didn't even know his name until the day he passed away.
Well, in court on Friday, Joanne Hughes, who is Arthur's grandmother, she basically blames the authorities for what happened here. And she also said that if Thomas Hughes had never met Emma Tustin, she believes that this would never have happened. Now, Nadeem Zahawi, the Education Secretary, is due to make a statement on this story in the House of Commons later this afternoon. And this story, it has, it's affected everyone. People, like I said earlier, are coming from all over the country to pay their respects to Arthur. But it remains, there are still lots of questions about how this happened. Lockdown had a part to play because, of course, he wasn't going to school. But when the schools did reopen, his father did not send him in because he knew that the school would have picked up on his physical health because at that point he was very, very weak.
Balvinder Sidhi, thank you for bringing us that report there. West Midlands reporter in Solihull, where Arthur Lavinia Hughes and his, I want to say parents, but I don't even think they deserve that word, but that's where they lived.
Yes, absolutely. In that house, as they said, there will be a constant reminder to people in that community. A couple of big points stood out for me there. Arthur's dad, apparently, you heard Balvinder say it there, it wasn't sending him into school because he could get away with not sending him into school given the kind of world that we're living in at the moment these days, because he didn't want the school to end up reporting him again and seeing those injuries. There's another neighbour there, wasn't there, who said, look, we weren't aware of what was going on. We were all locked down at the time as well, and we couldn't see what was happening in front of us. Yeah. And these things are very real. I can understand that we're getting a lot of views in on this, certainly on when it comes to the death penalty as well. The death
the things that weren't normal or things that, so say we're living in normal times and you think, oh, that person hasn't, that child has, I haven't seen that child in a while, they haven't come out of their house, are they okay? Little normal things like that you'd pick up under normal times. In lockdown, that was almost taken away because it was completely normal to not see a child for months upon months and months. So that social contact, which is why I say, just even if it's for spotting things that are obviously amiss, is absolutely crucial, and we should never have that taken away again. That's my opinion.
Yeah, well, look, Andy's been in touch. Good morning. I served 30 years as a Metropolitan Police officer, excuse me, during which I witnessed many appalling crimes. I agree with your statements just now. Protect children, stop chasing people for not wearing masks. It's important as well, I should point out, quite a few people, not a lot, quite a few people anyway, be getting in touch to say, hang on a second, look, don't use a little boy's death essentially to try to push an anti-lockdown agenda, and that's really just straight up not what I'm doing at all. I think there are certain facts here, aren't there, about the amount of children now affected by mental health problems, mental health referrals, and indeed abuse, especially in Arthur's case, exacerbated by lockdown conditions.
That's
and it's a consideration that needs to be put in mind if we are considering having another lockdown.
Yeah, and Dame D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, has also made this point. She said, you know, there's a chance it could have been picked up, the abuse could have been picked up, and I assume would have been picked up much earlier if it wasn't for lockdown. But ultimately, let's not forget that the only people to blame for the death, I think, should really be the parents. In this case, Emma Tustin and his Arthur's father. But it's absolutely right that there's this massive review, isn't there? Because it was missed, that so many opportunities were obviously missed, and it's absolutely right that lessons should be learnt from that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, lots of you have been getting in touch, and keep it coming as well. It's always great to have your views on there, and people saying, look, unfortunately, it's too late, you know, for this particular boy now, but hopefully something can be done about it, and that's from Ken. So, you know, it's an issue that's not going away. And I do think as well, you know, it's important to say the Child Protection Services are absolutely going to cop it in this case. And some would say rightly so, and indeed probably rightly so. But at the same time as well, they do have an unbelievably, I'm not making any excuses for them, they do have an unbelievably massive workload. And that in itself points to a societal problem, doesn't it? Not just the fact that in this case, clearly red flags were missed. Yeah, absolutely. And they never do take parents away, children away from their parents. That's always the last resort, really. And rightly so, some would say, but I guess sometimes it doesn't work out for the best. But they've got massive caseloads, which, as you say, points to a societal problem. They've also massively underfunded, which means, again, they're understaffed, and which leads to lots of caseloads. There's not enough people to deal with them. But then I think, ultimately, given that there has to be some sort of system, really, that there needs to be a complete overhaul of the system, because clearly the police, I genuinely believe that if all the services knew what all the other services knew, and they put together the wider picture, because one little piece of the puzzle might be, oh, he has a bruise, not a big deal. But when you look at the whole picture, it's staggering that not more was done, and maybe that's what needs to be done better. Well, even look at it in what's going on at the moment with regards to the way that police forces are keeping tracks of children who are known to be being groomed, and also people who are known to be grooming children. If they drive from one particular borough or one particular city to another, and they get stopped in another one, those police forces all too often are not sharing that information with people. So the problem doesn't go away. Yes, indeed. Well, keep all your thoughts coming in to us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we will be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after the break. But first, the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Morning, everyone. Time for your weather with meteorologist Patrick Christie's. Looking ahead to today's weather across the UK, it will be windy with sunny spells and scattered showers across the southwest of England. The showers possibly wintry over the higher ground. Feeling cold in the northerly winds. In contrast, it will be cloudy with outbreaks of rain across the southeast, and the rain turning heavy at times. It'll be windy here too. South Wales will be windy and it will feel cold. There'll be sunny spells and some heavy blustery showers, wintry over the hills. Now, over in the Midlands as well, there will be outbreaks of rain and some hill snow towards the high ground of the southern Pennines. This apparently will clear eastwards with blustery showers following after that. It will be windy and it will feel cold. So the northeast now will have outbreaks of rain and hill snow, quickly clearing with drier and brighter conditions then following. The odd shower is then possible, these possibly turning wintry over the hills. It will be windy across Scotland, especially in the north and the west, adding to the chilly feel. There will be sunny spells and scattered blustery wintry showers, turning heavy at times. There will also be scattered heavy, occasionally wintry showers, which will affect much of Northern Ireland as well, with some bright or sunny spells in between. It will be windy here and it will feel cold. Rain and hill snow continues to clear east, while winds and showers in the west will gradually ease. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Morning, everyone. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki, and we're here all the way through until midday, as ever, with a show full of those biggest stories, lots of discussion on the issues that you care about.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've been reading those out this morning, and we'll get to those very shortly. But first, it's time for the latest news.
I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 10 o'clock. Boris Johnson is pledging to break up county lines gangs as part of the government's £300 million drugs policy overhaul in England and in Wales. Under the scheme to disrupt the rural trade in Class A narcotics, recreational drug users now face having their passports or their driving licences confiscated. Police will also be able to seize dealers' phones with the idea of texting their clients, warning them about the dangers of drugs. The 10-year commitment includes what ministers are calling the largest ever single investment in treating and rehabilitating addicts.
We've known probably for 50 years now that treatment investment is about 3 times more effective than investing in prohibition or policing it or any kind of supply side intervention. So we should basically be getting everyone who needs treatment for any addiction into treatment within days.
The Education Secretary will make a statement to MPs later today about the circumstances leading to the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes. A major government investigation is underway to look at safeguarding failings in the case. The Attorney-General has also launched a review into the sentences handed down to the 6-year-old's killers. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life for his murder with a minimum term of 29 years. His father, Thomas Hughes, was sentenced to 21 years for manslaughter. Safeguarding experts say the whole system of child protection needs rethinking.
We, for 15 years, have been raising this, one government after another. The system doesn't work. Nobody is joining up the dots. The thresholds with social services are so high now, it really only is a blue light response.
One of the creators of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has warned future pandemics could be more contagious and more lethal. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert says scientific advances made during the coronavirus pandemic must not be lost. She also warned that Omicron variant may be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies. It follows reports that nearly 2 in 3 housebound people are yet to receive their booster jabs.
I'd like to finish on a high note, but the truth is the next one could be worse. It could be more contagious or more lethal or both. We cannot allow a situation where we have gone through all we have gone through and then find that the enormous economic losses we have sustained mean that there is still no funding for pandemic preparedness.
The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been jailed for 4 years for inciting dissent among the country's military rulers. She and her National League for Democracy party were removed from power in February in a coup. The ruling is the first in a series of cases being brought against the 76-year-old Nobel laureate. Suu Kyi faces 11 charges in total, which have been widely condemned as unjust. She's denied all charges. Thousands of people who are still without heating and hot water are now bracing themselves for yet another storm. The Met Office have warned Storm Barra will hit the UK on Tuesday with gale force winds of up to 50 miles an hour. Yellow wind weather warnings are in place across the country. The Energy Networks Association said that over 3,000 homes were still waiting to be reconnected to power supplies after Storm Arwen first hit 10 days ago. Tesco warehouse workers and drivers are going to stage a series of strikes in a dispute over pay. More than 1,000 employees are going to take industrial action in response to the company's offer of a 4% pay rise. The trade union Unite says this offer falls well below the current retail price index inflation rate of 6%. Workers are planning to strike for several days from September the 16th, with more action planned after Christmas. Every household in Wales is being given a free tree to plant. The Deputy Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters, kicked off the scheme, digging a hole for his own sapling. The £2 million plan is going to see Welsh homes either choose a tree of their own or have one planted on their behalf by the Woodland Trust. The government is hoping it's going to inspire families to plant more in future to help tackle climate change. You are up to date. I'll have the headlines for you at 10:30. For now, back to the point.
Yes, good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. And we've got a show with the absolute lot of it today, ladies and gents. So here's what's coming up.
Yes, hundreds of thousands of workers in hospitality, retail, arts and entertainment do not qualify for statutory sick pay and are therefore at risk of losing out if they have to self-isolate under the new COVID restrictions. That's according to a new report. We'll discuss what protections are in place for these people should they be forced to isolate.
Yes, the return of the pingdemic, eh? But anyway, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has faced continued questions over a reported party last Christmas in number 10 Downing Street, whilst London was essentially locked down, indeed most of the country as well. Is this going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of public support for Boris? We'll be discussing that with our guest.
Yes, and the government is pledging to dismantle 2,000 county lines gangs as part of a new 10-year drug strategy for England and Wales, going to be announced today. They are investing £300 million in a drugs policy overhaul, which will put additional focus on treatment and recovery. But will this new emphasis work? Well, we'll be talking about that.
Yes, we'll have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. And as always, get in touch with us, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Mercy gives her views on whole life orders for child killers.
Murdered tot Arthur Lavinia Hughes has sent shockwaves across the country, becoming a catalyst for action on protecting children better. The government yesterday ordered a national review into the multi-agency failings that allowed little Arthur to be so desperately failed. A separate inspection led by Schools Inspectorate Ofsted and the Care and Quality Commission and emergency services will also look into safeguarding in Solihull, where Arthur was killed. And the Attorney General's office has also confirmed the sentences served to the pair who killed Arthur will be reviewed to determine whether they were too low. And I think the harrowing details of this crime are worth recounting because we can never forget the utter depravity of Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes, Arthur's stepmom and dad. And some of this may be upsetting to people. Arthur was subjected to a protracted campaign of torture and abuse over months and months. He was denied food and drink and was made to stand alone in a corridor for up to 12 hours a day as punishment. On one sweltering summer's day, Tustin and Hughes were pictured sat in the living room eating ice cream as Arthur stood alone in a corridor baking in a onesie. The court was also shown text messages sent by Arthur's stepmom saying the tot was making her life hell and fantasising about abusing the little boy. The sadistic monsters even shared voice recordings with each other of Arthur begging for food and with the child crying out, "Nobody loves me." The doctors found 130 bruises on Arthur's little body and so much salt in his system as a result of poisoning that they thought their machines were faulty. Now, Arthur's granddad, Peter Halcrow, speaking in the Sun newspaper today, has said that the evil pair must never see the light of day again, that they should never leave prison as long as they live. And he's completely right, isn't he? It's absolutely no use talking about the death penalty. It will never be reinstated in this country. But I think the only fitting punishment within the bounds of our laws is a whole life order. Whole life orders are not given lightly in this country. Around 1% of prisoners serving life sentences have them, meaning they'll never be released from prison. They're only given in cases where the seriousness of the offence is thought by judges to be exceptionally high, where the court takes the view that the murder is so grave the offender should spend the rest of their life in prison. The Crown Prosecution Service says that this could include a crime such as the murder of a child if it involves sadistic motivation. I, for one, cannot think of a crime as heinous as torturing and murdering a child. My daughter is the same age as Arthur when he died. The thought of hurting someone so little, so innocent, is truly soul-destroying. And it's been difficult for me as a parent to listen to and report the details of this case. I'm sure there are millions of us across the country who have shed tears and lost sleep thinking about what this little boy went through. Sadly, no outpouring of national love will bring Arthur back. But the very, very least we could do is make sure the people who did this never see the light of day again. Give the monsters a whole life order.
Yes, well, there we are. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it does reignite the death penalty debate. I think you're correct. I don't think we ever will get it back in this country. And it's interesting, actually, to see the stats on this. Now, I've checked these up a couple of months ago, and it's pretty mixed, actually, when it comes to whether or not people want the death penalty reinstated. It's certainly not as overwhelming as I think it probably should be if you did want to have a referendum on it, for example. So it doesn't look like we're going to get that. But the whole life orders thing is a big one. Some people then hit back, don't they, and go, well, hang on a minute, it costs us loads of money to keep these people alive in prison. But what's the alternative?
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather justice was served. I completely get the economic arguments sort of against keeping prisoners in prison for longer than they need to be, so to speak. But I am more than happy to pay as a taxpayer to make sure people who torture and murder children never are let out into society again, because I think that is justice. I think the price for justice, if it is whatever it is, £45,000 a year, I'm, as a taxpayer, more than happy to pay that. And the government wastes billions on all manner of things anyway, so we might as well use it for justice. But it is interesting, and, you know, I think the last sort of prolific case to prisoner to get a whole life order was Wayne Couzens, of course, who murdered Sarah Everard. I don't know whether the judges here, when they review this, will give her a whole life order, but I just can't see how they can't find that to be the fitting punishment when this is reviewed, but we'll see.
Yeah, a lot of people have been in touch about the death penalty issue as well. The argument that innocent people have been put to death is now out of date. There are too many cases now that warrant the death penalty from Stuart. I think, in Stuart's mind at least, they're feeling that crime is getting worse and the types of crime are getting worse. That's obviously Stuart's view on that, but a lot of people as well simply saying that it will never, ever happen. But there we go.
Yes, now moving on from that, illegal drug users could have their passports taken away as part of the Prime Minister's new 10-year plan to tackle drug-related crime. Expected to be announced this week, the plans include removing offenders' driving licences and football-style travel bans.
Yes, well, tougher measures will also be put into place to break up county lines gangs. Meanwhile, 50 local authorities with the worst drug issues, including Middlesbrough, Blackpool and Liverpool, will receive increased funding. Well, now a man that needs little introduction, ladies and gentlemen, an institution in his own right. The one and only Mr. Peter Hitchens joins us, journalist and author of several books, not least The War We Never Fought, the British establishment's surrender to drugs. Peter, how are you?
Morning.
Thank you very much for coming into the studio with us. What do you make of the government's current proposals anyway?
It's the usual bilge. Governments every so often pretend to be tough on drugs. They have no intention of doing so. Since 1971, our governments of both parties have been in headlong retreat, particularly in face of the marijuana lobby, but the other drugs, of course, follow as well. But every so often, to reassure the people among the voters who think that something should be done about this, they pretend this is pretense. The main pretense of toughness is always to get tough on the evil dealers. Now, actually, if you look at the figures, the number of prosecutions of drug dealers each year remains pretty much constant, and the sentences imposed remain pretty much constant, and nothing, whatever happens. You can't actually prevent the growth of drug taking by trying to interdict supply. You can only do it by trying to interdict demand, by actually punishing people who buy and use drugs, which is what we've principally given up doing. And this will have no effect at all.
So even the idea of taking someone's passport away or their driving licence, I mean, that's impacting their lives.
The word "could" is used. Yeah. Whenever you see the word "could" used in a report, it means could not. Might not, may not. It's the same thing. Do you really think the police, who can barely be bothered to get out of their cars, are going to go around taking people's passports away? There might be one or two spectaculars, but in general, nothing will change because the British government and establishment are so full of people who have taken drugs themselves or who allow their children to do it that they are not going to act on it.
So you think rather than sort of targeting supplies, targeting and punishing, targeting demand and punishing people for taking drugs is a better way to combat this issue? What kinds of punishment, so to speak, do you think would be fitting for people who do take liberally Class B and Class A drugs?
I have nothing against prosecuting suppliers, but I just think it's ridiculous if the thing being supplied is bad, which must be the idea behind this, that people are allowed to buy it. The law already sets out very heavy penalties. I mean, for instance, the cannabis, a Class B drug, attracts in law a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment for possession and an unlimited fine. Nothing remotely resembling this happens to anybody who's caught in possession of cannabis. By and large, the police ignore the crime altogether. If the crime was not ignored, if first offenders were given a serious recorded caution, which is what I strongly believe they should be, not the alleged caution which is given now, which is meaningless, but a serious recorded caution and told, if we catch you again with this, you will be in big trouble, and then on a second offence was sent to prison, then I think you would find, after a very small number of prosecutions, that most people would decide that a spliff simply wasn't worth the risk of going to jail, and also it wasn't worth the risk of losing the right to travel abroad.
Do you accept that? Because some people are making the argument that this is a public health issue and we should follow the likes of Scotland, for example, in treating people who are caught in possession or dealing it as a public health problem. What do you make of this issue of diverting them into health services rather than into the criminal justice system?
Well, Scotland's not exactly been successful in these terms. The number of drug deaths in Scotland is extremely high and doesn't seem to fall, despite the long-standing liberal policies which they've followed up there. And also, it's a confusion, isn't it? Illegal drug abuse is not a sickness. You go out and you do it deliberately. It takes some time to become habituated to drugs. It takes some effort to buy them. People who are genuinely ill would love to have the freedom to give up their illness. If you've said someone who had cancer, look, you can give this up, bit of effort, you can give it up, they'd leap at the chance. There is a completely false equation to treat willful crime as if it was compulsory illness. And it's an insult, in my view, to the genuinely ill to offer treatment to people who choose to commit crime.
Do you think, though, that we're always going to have a problem? Something you alluded to earlier is, at the moment, it looks like sniffer dogs might be about to be called into the Houses of Parliament. There are in 13 different bathrooms around the Houses of Parliament in the parliamentary estate, including some quite close to the private offices of Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. There have been found to be traces of cocaine, reportedly. Until that stops, presumably, the public won't accept any of the government's initiatives.
Well, why should they? But drug abuse entered the British elite in the late 1960s and 1970s at university. I was virtually the only person at the University of York in the 1970s who wasn't smoking dope. And it is so prevalent, and there is no real moral objection to it among most of these people. So obviously that is one of the reasons why they don't do anything and why such things won't happen.
Can I ask why? I mean, obviously it's a personal question, but can I ask why you, as far as I'm aware, never engaged in any drug use whatsoever?
Why should you ask somebody why they don't commit a crime? Surely you should be getting in the people who are...
No, I understand. I just wondered if it was
members of the
personal
government
thing,
who've admitted taking cocaine. Get them in and ask them why they commit a crime, and also then ask the criminal justice system why nothing happens to them.
No, I take that point completely. I just wondered if it was a personal thing. For you, it's the fact that if you did it, it would be because you would be committing a crime.
One takes decisions, but I mean, this isn't the point. It shouldn't be an oddity that people don't commit crime.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you very much, Peter. It was great to have you on board, as always, and thank you very much for coming into the studio for us as well. I believe there was just one thing I'd like to pick up with you. Last time you were here, actually, you were on a show that I was covering, and you went out of your way to tweet that you think I look a bit like Eric Burdon. I want to see if you stand by that.
No, absolutely, yes. I am actually old enough to remember.
We'll get a picture up for those of us who are...
You look a lot more like Eric Burdon than Liz Truss looks like Margaret Thatcher. But...
That's true, that's very true. Thank you very much, Peter. Cheers for coming in. Peter Hitchens there, the national treasure that is. Anyway.
Yes, indeed. Well, coming up, a national investigation has been launched into the murder of 6-year-old boy Arthur Labinho Hughes. We look into what the investigation aims to achieve after this break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, before that break, let's look ahead to today's weather across the UK. It will be windy with sunny spells and scattered showers across the southwest of England. The showers possibly wintry over the higher ground. Feeling cold in the northerly winds. In contrast, it'll be cloudy with outbreaks of rain across the southeast, the rain turning heavy at times. It'll be windy here too. Going to South Wales, it will be windy and it will feel cold. There'll be sunny spells and some heavy blustery showers, wintry over the hills. And over in the Midlands, there'll be outbreaks of rain and some hill snow towards the high ground of the southern Pennines. This will clear eastwards with blustery showers following. Windy and feeling cold as well. And in the northeast, there'll be outbreaks of rain and hill snow quickly clearing with drier and brighter conditions then following. The odd shower is then possible, these possibly turning wintry as well over the hills. It'll be windy across Scotland, especially in north and west, adding to the cold feel. There will be sunny spells and scattered blustery wintry showers turning heavy at times. Scattered heavy, occasionally wintry showers will affect much of Northern Ireland as well, with some bright or sunny spells in between. It will be windy here and feel cold as well. Rain and hail snow continues to clear east, while winds and showers in the west will gradually ease, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, well, morning, everybody. Now, we've covered quite a bit already today. There's Boris Johnson and this government's new plan, apparently, to tackle the drug crisis that we've got in this country, the war on drugs. Of course, it does come as there are potentially going to be sniffer dogs employed in Parliament, as it were, that they can try to tackle a believed issue there. Also, of course, we would tackle what was going on in the case of, obviously, poor Arthur Hughes, who sadly passed away. Of course, he was murdered, wasn't he? And lots of people have been getting in touch about that. And it seems now that the finger of blame is being pointed in various different directions. Whenever a situation like this happens, of course, people are to blame. Now, the vast majority of views, you can see there, GB views at gbnews.uk, are squarely pointing the finger at his stepmum. It was really his dad's girlfriend, wasn't it? I don't know if you could say stepmum, really. But a lot of people are now actually calling for things like the death penalty to actually come back into force. And indeed, Darren has been in touch to say, I would bring back the death penalty for cases of child murder. Mercy, you were saying that you prefer a full life tariff.
Well, in principle, no, it's not my preference. My preference is that, it's probably something that is not fitting for a civil society, the punishment I think they should get, so I won't go into that. But given the bounds of our laws, we don't have the death penalty. We're never going to get the death penalty. The trajectory in terms of the death penalty in the Western world, obviously in America, is stopping the use of the death penalty. So the idea that we would suddenly bring it back is, I think, just absurd. I don't think it was going to happen. But in lieu of the death penalty, I think we have to give these people, particularly Emma Tustin, who was convicted of murdering Arthur. His dad was convicted of manslaughter. We should give her, and perhaps him, but I don't think you can for manslaughter. We should give her a whole life order, and she should never, ever be let out of prison. And she has other kids as well. I don't want this woman to go on and potentially, be responsible for any more children.
Well, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because if someone routinely abuses dogs, right, you can get banned from ever keeping dogs. And I just wonder, when you see abusive parents and things like that, I'm sure that there are restrictions. There are restrictions that are placed on them when they get out of prison, don't get me wrong, but can you ever actually ban someone from having children again? I'm not sure, but anyway. Philip's been in touch. I witnessed the death penalty being carried out in Thailand and in Pakistan. It's not a pretty sight, but it's not a deterrent. It's a money-saving exercise. So there we are.
Yeah, well, I don't think it is a money-saving exercise. It does cost a lot more money to actually carry out the death sentence in America, at least, than it would to just keep that person incarcerated because of all the appeals process, the years and decades sometimes long appeals and all the stuff that goes into it. But look, I think what this shows is that so many people. It shows the gravity of the crime that people think, because people don't talk about the death penalty lightly, do they? It's really for the most heinous of crimes, and it just shows how grave this is. But I don't know if you remember the case of Baby P, who was tortured and murdered in relatively, a similar way by the people who were looking after him. I believe it was his mother and his mother's partner. And, there's been other cases. Has anything really changed? Look where we are. That's why I'm not very hopeful whether this particular review will actually lead to the change that is necessary to safeguard children.
Yeah, and lots of people, it's all very well and good having a discussion about capital punishment. Indeed, some people talk about corporal punishment, of course, but actually, as Leslie rightly points out, at the first signs of abuse, a child should be examined right away by a hospital doctor. This would show up old injuries as well as new ones. How often do you see it in case of child abuse where right towards the end they get x-rayed or something and it reveals a load of historic breaks and historic injuries? It's shameful and heartbreaking, and that's from Leslie. And I suppose, look, we don't have to sit here and have a conversation, do we, about whole life orders, about death penalties, about whatever, if actually the issue gets nipped in the bud early and sadly a child, and thankfully, a child doesn't die.
Yes, indeed. Well, keep your thoughts coming into our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll return to those a bit later. But for now, moving away into the world of politics, in an escalation of tensions between Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and the party's deputy leader Angela Rayner, an aide to Miss Rayner, Jack McKenna, has been suspended. McKenna's suspension comes just days after a surprise shadow cabinet reshuffle that Miss Rayner claims she didn't know was happening.
Yes, although Keir Starmer has looked to smooth relations with his deputy recently, Angela Rayner was allegedly unaware of the suspension of her aide. Well, let's talk to the former Labour spad and Labour activist, Paul Richards. Thank you very much, Paul, for joining us. There he is. What do you make of this? Is this civil war?
This is not even close to being civil war in Labour Party terms. I mean, this is just a fairly traditional row between the leader and their deputy. Let's face it, no previous deputy leader, to my knowledge, has been consulted on the intricacies of a reshuffle. That's a job for the leader. And I think it's wrong for the sort of legacy figures from the Corbyn era to be working for current shadow cabinet ministers, briefing against the leader, which is what was been happening over the last few weeks. So it's a little bit of an internal row that needs to be sorted out. Some people need to go back in their box, and we need to unite behind Keir, but it's not a civil war.
Well, it's all very well and good saying that, but any member of any party would agree, really. You need to unite behind your leader, certainly if you've got any coherent chance of success. But these briefings about Angela Rayner not being consulted about a reshuffle or not being consulted about her aide being suspended or whatever, they must be coming from within Rayner's camp, surely. So is it actually her who's trying to fuel a civil war?
Well, I doubt they're coming from her personally. I suspect it's a rogue operative who perhaps his loyalties, lie elsewhere than Keir, and that he thinks he's doing, his boss a favour. We've seen this so many times, haven't we, where the spin doctors go off and say things on behalf of their bosses, where the bosses don't know or agree with what's being said. So, I think it's a behind-the-scenes operation, and Keir has to stamp it out because it does do damage. And of course, journalists love to leap on this stuff, and it creates headlines and all the rest of it. But it creates the impression of a party divided, and of course, the last year has shown that Labour is not divided. Labour is actually now on a clear course, and the trajectory has been established, and the recent reshuffle showed some really good people coming into the top team, and the party's hasn't been in a better shape for about 5 or 6 years, I would say. So, it's one of those, it's the froth, really. I think that the model has to be surely John Prescott, because he, came from a different wing of the party to Tony Blair, but he was utterly loyal. He made his views known behind the scenes, not in public, and he united behind the leader all the way through that long time of Labour government, and that's where Angela Rayner should look for inspiration, I think.
Sorry, just quickly before you ask your question, it's the only times that the words model and John Prescott have been used in the same sentence there, but anyway, carry on.
Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, spoke to former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and he acknowledged, there might be a rift, perhaps, but Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer are united in their, desire for Labour to be the next government. Of course, that's all well and good. But he did say that fundamentally there's a massive difference between the character that is Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer. He's very wooden, he's very stale, very vanilla, and she's, quite fiery, and she's perhaps appeals more to the working class space. Whose approach do you think will ultimately win?
Well, I'm sorry to say this, Mercy, you'll expect the answer, but it's got to be a combination of the two, isn't it? That's where the reason you have the sort of the yin and the yang at the top of a Labour Party. Gordon Brown and Harriet Harman were made from very different cloth, but they, created a sort of chemistry at the top, and same with Prescott and Blair, and you can go back through the history of the party. So Tom Watson and Jeremy Corbyn were very different figures too. There's always been this sort of idea that the leader and the deputy leader should be very different types of character. They should appeal to different parts of the country, and they should unite different parts of the party. And that's the magic when it happens. Angela needs to realise that's her role, is to make her views known. And no one's saying that she has to not be very vociferal and loud and all the rest of it, but behind the scenes, and then unite behind the leader when it comes to the public.
Yeah, OK. Just to finish it off, really, towards the end, you're a Labour activist as well. I'm quite intrigued with you at the moment. If you went out and did some Labour activism, what are you actually putting forward that isn't just a criticism of everything that Boris Johnson and the Tories have done wrong? What's the positive message for Labour at the minute?
Well, there's a range of policies that came out of the Labour Party conference earlier this year, in fact, where all kinds of things were being discussed around the National Health Service, around social care, investing in the public services. The mood music is there. Now, I'll accept the criticism. There isn't the specific manifesto right now, but that's because we're now, a year, 2 years away from an election, and that process hasn't really taken place. But, the job of the opposition is to oppose, of course, but also then to provide a sort of an alternative. And there is more work to be done on that. I accept that completely.
Well, thank you for joining us, Labour SPAD and Labour activist Paul Richards there.
Thank you. Yes, well, there we go. Well, the government reintroduced pre-departure COVID travel tests over the weekend, didn't it? In a move to combat the spread of the Omicron variant of coronavirus, currently sweeping through the UK.
Yes, we'll be discussing that very shortly.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date with your news. I'm afraid we don't have your news update. I'll be back with you very shortly with that. Here we go.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody who's been tuning in. And loads of you have been getting in touch with your views as well, so make sure that you keep them coming, obviously, throughout the course of the show. Look, loads of you have been getting in touch, and gbviews@gbnews.uk is exactly where you can do that. Of course, Twitter as well, @GBNews. But we'll go into those shortly. So China have threatened to take countermeasures if US politicians don't stop calling for a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. US President Joe Biden said last month that he was considering a diplomatic boycott to protest China's human rights record, including what Washington says is genocide against minority Muslims.
Yes, the administration has been under pressure from activists and members of Congress to skip the Games. Those calling for a boycott are grandstanding and should stop so as to not affect the dialogue and cooperation between China and the United States, which is important in important areas. That's what the China's Foreign Ministry spokesman has said.
Or earlier on the Great British Breakfast, Simon and Rosie spoke to Sir Ian Duncan Smith about the planned boycott. They began by asking him what he made of Biden's expected announcement.
The problem we've got is I think America will do it, but the UK should have done it weeks ago. We've been asking the UK government to boycott the Winter Olympics in China because of the appalling abuse, not just of the Uyghurs, but, remember, they broke the agreement, the international agreement we had with China on Hong Kong. They've now been arresting Hong Kong peaceful Hong Kong democracy campaigners. They occupied the South China Seas. They've killed Indian soldiers on their border, and they've been putting Tibetans in forced labor camps. It goes on, smashing Christian churches. This is a regime that is brutal and does not believe in the concept in any shape or form of human rights or the rule of law. So we should have boycotted these on any of those, but particularly now on what we believe is genocide of the Uyghur. And at the same time, the Americans do as well, although the British government refuses to acknowledge that, which is very sad. And Peng Shui's disappearance for a period of time, followed by this rather ridiculous statement that was made, which was quite clearly done under duress, was enough in itself to want to boycott the Winter Olympics. But I'm very pleased, and I must say I'm proud of the WTA for standing up for her rights and refusing to have any tennis competitions in China. And of course, as ever, the ATP, rather like the International Olympic Committee, find all sorts of wriggly excuses. It's always about we must engage to make sure that things change. The honest truth is we've been engaging, as they say, with China over all these sort of abuses, but nothing ever happens. China goes on cracking down on almost anybody it chooses. And that's the real problem. They don't even, by the way, sign up properly to COP26 and their requirements to net zero. So I don't know exactly what it is that we seem to be achieving with China, but China seems to be getting away with literal murder at the moment. And, by the way, threatening Taiwan with invasion, which I just wonder any other country in the world that did this, and they'd already be on the naughty step, at least there, but not with China, apparently. That we should be looking to, first of all, move the Winter Olympics. But the Olympic Committee decided not to do that. So I then said, look, the least we can do is that countries themselves should not attend. That is to say, their ministers and their officials, including diplomatic officials, should not attend the Winter Olympics, and make it very clear this is because of Chinese behavior, that we cannot allow them to have this great show, as it were, for them, free and without any punishment, as it were. When it comes to athletes, it's up to, I think, individuals to decide what to do. They must make that decision. If they choose not to go, then all well and good. But if they don't, well, that's a matter for the Olympic Committee. I would love the International Olympic Committee to themselves say enough's enough, we're not doing this anymore because of their behavior. But just like the ATP, they seem to have no guts at all. Whereas the Women's Association, the WTA, are really courageous, and I take my hat off to them. The country practices genocide when it abuses, controls, and invades territory, when it throws its military might around and threatens its neighbours. Don't we need to do something about that instead of actually kowtowing to them like we've been doing? I thought the lessons of the 1930s, without taking the right action, which ended up with over 60 million people dying in the world as a result of the Second World War, I thought these were major lessons to have learned, and it seems like we've learned absolutely nothing from these kind of areas. And it's time that we stood up to China and said, this is appalling behavior. You cannot go on like that and expect to trade freely and be in the world community until you change your ways. But the funny thing about them is that they very much love the idea of that spectacle, to be able to showcase China as an important, or Russia or whatever, as an important member of the world community, and to show just how wonderful they are. They hate it if they get criticism from outside, and they react viciously. I mean, there's 5 of us in the House of Commons that have been, and in the House of Lords, that have been sanctioned by China, myself included, for criticizing them over what we called it the genocide of the Uyghur. There's also Americans that have been sanctioned, and European members of IPAC that have been sanctioned. So, they even with ordinary people like myself, they seem to take it very hard and they hate it. But when a country says, I'm not going there because of the Winter Olympics, and if all the countries do the same in terms of their government and their officials, then they will hate that too, and it will be a body blow to them. Internally, Chinese people would ask, what's all that about? And so it just begins. You've got to make these statements because they hate them so much that we know they have an effect.
Yes, well, there we go, Sir Duncan Smith there. Of course, talking to the Great British Breakfast about Beijing. Lots of you getting in touch about that, actually, saying that, look, it is time that we boycotted not just China in a sporting sense, but generally, really. I think since the coronavirus erupted as well, a lot of people have been wondering why we have as much of our manufacturing and indeed our economy, I suppose, based in China. Maybe it's time now to bring things back to Blighty a little bit, perhaps.
Yes, indeed. GBNews at GBNews.uk. Lots of you have been getting in touch as well about a story we've been talking about all morning, which is the sad, tragic case of Arthur Lavinia Hughes, who was murdered by his dad's girlfriend, and his father was also charged with convicted of manslaughter as well. I think it's important to make that distinction.
Yes, I'm sure I'm just reiterating how the whole country feels over this tragic death. It makes me feel so chilled. The abuse was cold, calculated, sustained and relentless. We all wish we could bring him back and let him know how loved he really was. His murderers do need to be punished as a result, and frankly, their current sentences don't. And that's from Joanne, and that is echoed really throughout the inbox.
Yeah, and I think for me, the saddest thing, I was saying this to Patrick a bit earlier, is the fact he was crying out and they recorded this, which is completely sadistic, of him saying nobody loves me. He genuinely just didn't, which I'm sure is something they had repeatedly told him, because that's not something a 6-year-old child would just come out with himself. And I find that really tragic. And when I've seen the complete amazing outpouring of love he's received since from politicians, from sportsmen, from members of the public, and you just really wish we could have sort of bottled that up and, given it to him, because he obviously didn't think anybody cared about him, and it's really sad. That's the thing that really gets me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, we're just going to move away from that for now. Now, over 500,000 workers up and down the country could face financial hardship due to not qualifying for sick pay. So the Trades Union Congress has warned that workers in the hospitality, retail, arts and entertainment sectors do not qualify for statutory sick pay, which may leave them at risk. Leaving them at risk, of course, of no income over Christmas, according to a report.
Yes, given the emergence of the Omicron variant of coronavirus and the reintroduction of some isolation restrictions, trade unions are particularly worried as the festive season approaches. And we can now speak to Stuart Jordan from the Safe and Equal campaign and an NHS nurse as well, a campaign aiming to achieve full sick and isolation pay for all. So just talk us a bit through this. What are the current rights of somebody who isn't entitled to statutory sick pay if they are forced to self-isolate?
Well, they get nothing and they're expected to take a massive financial hit in order to do the right thing and isolate. But even statutory sick pay is incredibly inadequate. So statutory sick pay just pays at £96.35 a week. And we reckon there's about 12 million workers across the UK workforce who would only get that amount of money if they have to isolate. Now, that's a problem for those workers, but it's actually a problem for everybody. Because if people can't afford to isolate, then they're going to be going into work and they're going to be spreading the virus. So the UK's got one of the worst statutory sick pay schemes in the developed world. And we've also got one of the highest death rates from COVID in the developed world. And I don't think these two things are a coincidence.
No. Do you think that unless, I mean, I can guess really, but do you think that unless this issue is sorted out, what we are going to end up with is people not having an app on their phone that might ping them, for example, and certainly not isolating if they are, i.e. still continuing to go around the office and potentially even around office Christmas parties, as that's the season that we're in at the moment, spreading this thing around, and that could, in your view, be worse in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, look, wherever you go, there are workers who cannot afford to isolate. So if you go into a care home, a lot of those workers won't get any occupational sick pay. They won't be paid if they have to take time off work. And they're faced with a terrible decision, do the right thing and isolate, but then struggle to pay the rent, struggle to put food on the table, or to continue to go into work and potentially spread the virus, causing untold harm to others. This is a situation that can easily be sorted out. So the Safe and Equal campaign is a network of trade unionists and key workers. We realised that we'd be working alongside people who couldn't afford to isolate at the start of the pandemic. We organised at work. We went to our employers and we said, look, we have a right to safe work through the pandemic. And part of that is that you need to guarantee everybody who's working alongside us the rights to full pay. And we won that in the NHS. We've won it in some care homes. We've won it in meat processing plants. We've won it on public transport. We've won it in the civil service. We've won it in local government. Whenever we put this argument to the employer, they've coughed up and paid sick pay. It's doable. We key workers need to have a bit of pride. We shouldn't be going to work in unsafe workplaces. We need a levelling up of sick pay so everybody can isolate without suffering any detriment. They do it in lots of other European countries. The UK is a real outlier on this issue.
Yeah. Your campaign works with a lot of Labour MPs. Is this out of choice ideologically, or are they the only ones listening? Because surely the people who are most important in getting the real change are the government, who happen to, of course, be Conservative.
Well, we're a campaign of trade unionists, and the Labour Party is supposed to be the party of trade unionists. We've had great support from some Labour MPs. We think the party as a whole needs to take this issue up and campaign on it properly. There's been far too little about this issue. It's the key public health measure in order to stop the spread of the virus is that people isolate when they have to. And we know from the government's own statistics that around 80% of people breach isolation rules. 80%, and a lot of those people aren't doing it because they're bad people. They're doing it because they have no choice. This is an issue that can be sorted out today.
Okay, all right, well, I suppose as far as the workers are concerned, fingers crossed that it actually does. But thank you very much, Stuart. Stuart Jordan there from the Safe and Equal campaign, also as well, of course, an NHS nurse. Now, a new scheme to tackle domestic abuse is being rolled out in the north of England for the very first time. The Inspire to Change programme tries to get men to ditch the tough guy stereotypes and help them to cope with problems without turning to anger and aggression.
Yes, well, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin spoke to South Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner Dr Alan Billings earlier. Here's what he said.
Dr Billings, thank you for joining us this morning. I guess just to begin with, what proportion of domestic abuse offenders are likely to take up this programme? Because it's quite reliant on men having the will to change, and obviously not all men may necessarily want to do that.
No, not expecting really big numbers, but because, as you say, they have got to want to do this. And I think it takes a while before people realise that there's something about them that needs to change. So we've got to have willing people to do that. So I don't think it'll be significant numbers. Well, significant in the sense that these are people who, if we can get them to change their behaviour, that is significant.
And many people at home will say, why aren't South Yorkshire Police just arresting these men? South Yorkshire Police does seem to do better than the national average, but according to the data it seems like it's pretty much 50-50 whether an arrest will be made for a domestic abuse crime, and I'm sure you'd agree that that's not good enough, is it?
Well, I think the police, we do encourage them to arrest, and certainly we want people to be arrested and removed from households if they're presenting a real challenge, a real threat to the people who are in that household. That may be partners, but it may also be children as well. So we want them arrested and removed as quickly as possible. That's why I say these people who will join this Inspire to Change programme are likely to be a very small number of people.
And you've touched on the numbers here, but there were almost 35,000 domestic abuse incidents in South Yorkshire in the year to March 2020. You've said the numbers won't be that high. Do you have a target for how much lower you expect that number to be going forward as a result of this scheme?
No, I don't think we have a target, because that would be wrong. Because if you had a target, then you might artificially get people to go on a course. We just want as many people as possible on the programme. And I think that if we're going to seriously tackle this question of violence against women and girls, then within the domestic setting, within the family setting, that's a key area. And if people can recognise that there is something about their behaviour, it's controlling, it's abusive. If they can recognise that, that's the first step we can have in them reducing that offensive, abusive behaviour. So it's an important and a challenging programme. It's funded partly by my office, but it's a partnership of all the local authorities in this area. That's Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield and Doncaster, a big partnership. And together, I think we can make a significant difference.
South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner Dr Alan Billings, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, and thank you, Kevin, as well, for bringing us that report. Kevin Larkin there on the money as usual.
Thank you. Now, the government reintroduced pre-departure COVID travel tests over the weekend in a move to combat the spread of the Omicron variant of coronavirus currently sweeping through the UK.
Yeah, Omicron cases rose 50% on Sunday to a UK total of 246. However, the new rules have received backlash from ministers, warning that the rule change will be yet another blow to struggling travel industry, with a leading scientific advisor saying that it would make no material difference to the spread of the new variants.
Yes, from tomorrow, travellers will have to provide a negative result before they can board a flight to the UK, with those who test positive having to quarantine at their own expense. So those are the latest travel and quarantine rules coming in at the moment.
They are, and they're causing mass outrage, actually, really. And I think it is certain things like the fact that at the moment, as it stands, we're not really aware of anyone dying specifically from this Omicron variant. There's certainly no indication, again, as it stands, that this is in any way more resistant to the vaccines that we currently have, or that indeed the conditions of Omicron and the symptoms of it are any worse than the strains that we already have here as well. And I think that is causing a lot of people a lot of confusion as to why the government is going as strong on this as it currently is.
I think because we didn't know much about this variant, I think the government to an extent was stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they had to take some preemptive measures just in case. And I think it's very difficult to get the balance right on the preemptive measures that you do take, because inevitably you'll be accused of, oh, well, why are you doing this? We don't even know if this is going to be any danger at all. But then if they don't do something, then they'll be accused of not doing something because we don't know the danger of it. So it's a tricky balancing act.
But I think it's a tricky one as well, in the sense that supposedly anyway, we would know more, wouldn't we, about Omicron in about 3 weeks' time. Well, we're probably about halfway there now, aren't we? So we need some answers soon. But what I think people do find confusing and perplexing is the idea that already they're looking to extend some of the, say, restrictions, I suppose mask wearing, etc., but reserving the right to go and do increased restrictions. Boris Johnson essentially deciding whether or not he wants to cancel Christmas on the 18th of December, supposedly, as well. Mixed messaging coming out of government, and I think a lot of people are a bit confused as to why it's all very well and good being cautious, but why does that then mean that you're already extending things so far? And I think people find that strange.
Yes, well, let us know what you think about Omicron. Are you worried? Are you worried about lockdown more than Omicron as well? GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Yes, indeed. And quite a few of you have been in touch regarding what we said before about statutory sick pay for workers. So basically, if you get pinged, potentially you have to self-isolate going forward. A lot of you might not qualify for statutory sick pay, as it turns out. And there's no name on this one. I worked part-time and didn't qualify for statutory sick pay. I suffered a heart attack. I was told I could be off for up to 6 months. As a single mum, I couldn't afford to. So I was 1 week off sick without pay. Then I had to book my 3 weeks annual leave and ask my doctor to sign me off. And I think that's a reality, isn't it, now, for a lot of people. But where do you stand on this? Because people go, well, look, I suppose a lot of people might just delete the app, not that you can condone that. But also, you know, the fact is, have we got all the money in the world for statutory sick pay? Some would say then, I suppose, it's a normal right.
Yeah, it does seem odd, I would suggest, that we can let people sort of go without pay for weeks just because they happen to be ill, especially the lowest paid who don't have a pot of savings to turn to when things go wrong. But it's also funny that these were long-standing problems before COVID, and it seems that we've been speaking about COVID and the problems brought about by COVID for so long that we've almost forgotten that we actually have so many other problems which were there before that we actually need to be talking about as a country.
Yes, well, keep all of your thoughts coming into us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after this break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. A spell of rain and, in some places, snow to come this afternoon, but followed on by bright spells and showers and a blustery breeze for all of us. That wind reaching gale force in the far northwest this afternoon as the rain clears eastwards. And in this part of the world, I think there's the risk of some snow falling for a time as the rain cools the atmosphere. Could even settle in 1 or 2 spots, but I don't think there'll be any widespread issues with that snow. And it does clear to bright spells and showers. Those showers on the heavy side with hail mixed in at lower levels. And again, some snow falling over the hills of Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The showers rattle through on a blustery breeze into the evening. But eventually overnight, the showers tend to ease away. The wind dies down as well. And under clear skies, temperatures fall away. A widespread frost as we begin things on Tuesday, with temperatures dipping to -1 to -3 Celsius in rural parts. But a bright start to the day ahead of this feature, which is a rapidly deepening low pressure during Monday and the first part of Tuesday. This is Storm Barra, named by Met Erin because of the strong wind impacts across the Republic of Ireland, but it's going to bring widespread wet and windy weather to much of the UK on Tuesday, starting off towards the southwest, those winds picking up, the rain pushing in during the morning, and in western areas the risk of 60 to 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts around exposed coasts. Snow for a time for Northern Ireland as well as that rain bumps into the colder air. But the more significant snow is expected across parts of northern England and Scotland, where at lower levels there'll be some reasonable snow amounts, but over the hills 10 centimetres of snow is likely, along with blizzards, so some really treacherous conditions here. And as the strong winds move into Scotland and Northern Ireland as well as northern England, the risk of disruption here in places. Wednesday stays unsettled with further rain and wind, turns quieter on Thursday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christies, and we're here until midday for another hour with today's big stories and lots of discussion as well.
Yes, well, make sure you get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be reading those out throughout the show. But first, time for your latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 11 o'clock. Boris Johnson is pledging to break up county lines gangs as part of the government's £300 million drugs policy overhaul in England and Wales. Under the scheme to disrupt the rural trade in Class A narcotics, recreational drug users could face having their passports or driving licences confiscated. Police will also be able to seize dealers' phones to harvest contacts and text clients warning them about the dangers of drugs. The 10-year commitment includes what ministers are calling the largest ever single investment and treating and rehabilitating addicts.
There are people who are using drugs and who are benefiting, if you like, from that, probably don't understand exactly what it means in terms of the drugs market, the involvement with gangs, the trafficking that goes on, the young people who are drawn into that, the rise that erect as a result of that. So I do want people to be a bit more thoughtful about that.
The Education Secretary will make a statement to MPs later about the circumstances leading to the murder of the 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes. A major government investigation is underway to look at safeguarding failings in the case. The Attorney-General has also launched a review into the sentences handed down to the couple. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life for his murder. His father, Thomas Hughes, was jailed for manslaughter. Safeguarding experts say the whole system of child protection needs rethinking.
We, for 15 years, have been raising this, one government after another. The system doesn't work. Nobody is joining up the dots. The thresholds with social services are so high now, it really only is a blue light response.
One of the creators of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has warned future pandemics could be more contagious and more lethal. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert says scientific advances made during the coronavirus pandemic must not be lost. She also warned that Omicron variants may be more resistant to both current vaccines and also natural antibodies. This follows reports that nearly 2 in 3 housebound people are yet to receive their booster jabs.
I'd like to finish on a high note, but the truth is the next one could be worse. It could be more contagious or more lethal or both. We cannot allow a situation where we have gone through all we have gone through and then find that the enormous economic losses we have sustained mean that there is still no funding for pandemic preparedness.
The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been jailed for 4 years for inciting dissent among the country's military rulers. She and her National League for Democracy party were removed from power in February in a coup. The ruling is the first in a series of cases brought against the 76-year-old Nobel laureate. Suu Kyi faces 11 charges in total. She denies all charges. Thousands of people who are still without heating and hot water are bracing themselves for another storm. The Met Office have warned that Storm Barra will hit the UK on Tuesday with gale force winds of up to 50 miles an hour. Yellow wind weather warnings are in place across the country. The Energy Networks Association said that over 3,000 homes were still waiting to be reconnected to power after Storm Arwen first hit 10 days ago. Tesco warehouse workers and some of their drivers are planning on staging a series of strikes in a dispute over pay. More than 1,000 workers are going to take industrial action in response to the company's offer of a 4% pay rise. The trade union Unite says this offer falls well below the current retail price index inflation rate of 6%. Workers are planning to strike for several days from December the 16th, with more action planned after Christmas. Yorkshire have confirmed Darren Gough as the country's new managing director of cricket. The former England paceman will be in post until the end of the 2022 season. His appointment comes after Azim Rafiq's allegations of institutional racism in the club. The club's former chairman and Roger Hutton and chief executive Mark Arthur stood down following the claims. Every household in Wales is being given a free tree to plant. The Deputy Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters, kicked off the scheme, digging a hole for his own sapling. The £2 million plan will see Welsh homes either choose a tree of their own to plant or have one planted on their behalf by the Woodland Trust. The government hopes it will inspire families to plant more in future to help tackle climate change. You're up to date. I'll be back with your latest headlines in half an hour. Right now, though, back to the point.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GBNews with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's, and we've got a show full of today's big stories and lots of discussion and opinion on the issues you're talking about. So here's what's on the menu for the next hour.
Yes, well, the Omicron variant continues to unnerve the government as they mandate pre-departure tests for all those arriving in the UK. So, how much do we need to worry about this variant? And are Christmas parties still going to be on?
Yes, and the government is pledging to dismantle 2,000 county lines gangs as part of a new 10-year drug strategy for England and Wales. They're investing £300 million in a drug policy overhaul, which will put additional focus on treatment and recovery. Well, will this new strategy work? Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will be joining us to discuss the latest.
Yes, and a new scheme to tackle domestic violence has come to South Yorkshire. We will hear from our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Kevin Larkin, who's spoken to South Yorkshire Police and Crown Commissioner on this.
Yes, that's all coming up over the next hour, and you can get in touch with your views as well, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll read those out throughout the show. But first, Patrick gives his views on the government's new drug policy.
Yes, well, Boris Johnson and Priti Patel are clamping down on middle-class drug users. They're coming up with new ways to clamp down on people who use recreational drugs, or indeed lifestyle drugs, as they're being called, like cocaine, for example. Some of these new measures include encouraging anyone caught with an illegal substance to go on a drug awareness course, and, if they refuse, they may have their lives interfered with. So they might have their passports taken off them, or their driving licences. This is on top of the fact that just simply by getting caught with an illegal substance and getting a criminal record, they might not be able to find another job or travel to countries like America and Australia. Apparently, Priti Patel is also considering creating a system that, whenever the phone of a drug dealer is confiscated, every single number saved in that phone gets a message from the police. It goes without saying that people shouldn't do drugs. They are illegal at the end of the day, and they have the potential to do massive harm to the lives of those people who take them, and indeed the lives of those around them, family members, etc., or even the victims of people in car crashes where the person behind the wheel was high. But this is absolutely ludicrous, in my take anyway, from the government. Our Home Secretary had this to say about recreational drug users. Their actions are directly leading to an increase in violent crime and people dying, but they pay no price. That will change. Well, what about slashing police numbers by tens of thousands and barely replacing them? What about preoccupying the police with draconian lockdown laws instead of instructing them to clamp down on knife, gun and other forms of violent crime? What about the destruction of child protection services so children who are flagged up as being vulnerable to gang crime simply aren't looked after? Boris Johnson said that middle-class drug users will now have nowhere to hide. Well, I think there's a potential anyway that they do have somewhere to hide. Parliament. Sniffer dogs may be deployed in Parliament now because drug use is allegedly rife. According to reports, traces of cocaine were found in 11 bathrooms on the parliamentary estate. These included bathrooms close to the private offices of both Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. Many of the bathrooms tested were only accessible to people who hold a parliamentary pass. There are around 19,000 pass holders, apparently, but most have not been coming in due to the COVID pandemic. And now people are coming forward to reveal what they call, anyway, a cocaine culture in Parliament. One person said, "I've seen an MP openly snorting cocaine at a party." One said as well that FOI requests have previously revealed that 2 drug dealers were arrested and apparently 13 people were detained for drugs possession on or around the estate last year. So, here we go again. Is it a do as I say, not as I do from our ruling class? We have had it, haven't we, with the coronavirus hypocrisy. There are still rumblings that there may have been Christmas bashes in Downing Street whilst we were all kept apart from our families. I think most people would rather the heads of criminal drug gangs and the violent thugs they send out onto the streets to do their bidding were arrested and charged, not someone called Paul who maybe dabbles once or twice a year at a party, who had his life ruined by a new policy, potentially dreamt up in a building where there are strong allegations that drug use is absolutely rife. Yeah, I just think it's just worth saying just briefly as well, look, obviously, just to re-emphasise, I'm certainly not saying that anyone should get away with doing drugs. What I am saying, though, is at the same time, is this the right policy? Maybe demonising some people who are more recreational users? Is it a little bit of a smoke screen to, the fact they're not necessarily going after these gangs? Although it is important, again, to say as well, there is money being put after going after the gangs.
Yeah, I just think 300 million is a very measly sum to try and crack down on 2,000 county lines gangs. But there you go. Let us know what you think. GBNews at gbnews.uk.
Yes.
But as Patrick was saying there, illegal drug users could have their passports taken away as part of the Prime Minister's new 10-year plan to tackle drug-related crime. Expected to be announced this week, the plans include removing offenders' driving licences and football-style travel bans. Tougher measures will also be put in place to break up county lines gangs.
Yes, meanwhile, 50 local authorities with the worst drug issues, and these include those in places like Middlesbrough, Blackpool and Liverpool, will receive increased funding. Well, let's talk to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who joins us now. So, look, just give us a few of the highlights, I suppose you could say, Mark, of what's being announced.
Well, we're told that there is going to be a very significant amount of money that will be invested in diversion schemes in the sort of healthcare side of the drugs epidemic. So I think that's to be welcomed. There are figures talking about potentially up to £500 million, which, if true, is very significant and is actually more than the 400 odd million pounds that have been cut from these treatment schemes over recent years. So that would certainly be welcome, because for decades now, successive governments have always spoken about the war on drugs and trying to get to grips with what is a very significant problem. And none have really managed it. It has continued to be a real difficult problem to grapple with. It is responsible, those involved in the drug trade are responsible for half of all the burglaries, robberies, thefts that occur, people that are trying to fund their habit. These terrible headlines that we get, 90-year-old woman mugged in the street or wherever. More often than not, that's someone on a drug habit who doesn't care that that's your great-grandmother, that wants to get as much money as they can to shoot it up their arm. So the healthcare side of it has been an issue, I think, that many involved in healthcare profession have said for a long time really needs more in the way of funding to try to divert people away from it, to stop, to break that cycle. And the cycle is, of course, offending, shooting it up your arm, being arrested, being jailed, going back out. In fact, actually, when you're in, also shooting it up your arm or taking it in other ways, coming out and doing this whole thing over and over again. It is a cycle of misery that needs to be broken somehow.
And some cynical people, never me, of course, might say that the government's trying to appear tough on crime here. It's a relatively small amount of money to tackle a massive, long-standing social issues. They're failing in terms of the channel. They know their base is, wants them to be tough on crime. Is it just, a tokenistic policy to appear that they're doing something on crime?
Well, today is going to be a week-long raft of announcements by the government. I think they want to seize back the initiative to show that they're tough on domestic issues like crime. So today we're talking about the issue around drugs. And you're right, as well as the treatment side of things, there is, of course, the inevitable, we're going after the drugs offenders. We've got to be seen to be still trying to chase the criminals involved in this miserable trade. And that's why they're talking about trying to smash county lines. They say that 1,500 county lines have been dismantled so far in recent years. Means absolutely nothing. You get rid of a county lines drug gang, another one pops up. All it is just, a phone line system into rural areas and a supply route. And they can be set up as quickly as they can be dismantled. Doesn't really mean much at the end of the day. All of these people being arrested, as I say, they enter the criminal justice system for a while, they're back out and they're reoffending again. It needs to really, I think, be an issue that grapples with the kind of offending behaviour. And the difficulty you've got as well is you've got kind of two, broadly speaking, it's a rather crude analysis, but you've got two areas of drug offending and drug taking. So those that are hooked on opioids, such as heroin, and also hooked on the likes of crack cocaine, versus those who are taking cocaine and taking, marijuana as a sort of recreational drug. Now, both levels of crime do fund the gangs that are responsible for a lot of the knife crime and the other criminality around what these gangs are doing. But it's obviously the opioids that is fueling a level of misery and addiction in terms of the crimes that I spoke about before, half of all of those burglaries, robberies and thefts. But it's not just that. Drugs deaths as well, more than 4,500 drugs-related deaths in England and Wales last year. And what do you do? I mean, do you lock them up in prison, as some people would say? Well, there's 300,000 of them. The current prison population is 80,000 people. You can see what the dilemma is. You would need to build 4 times as many prisons to be able to deal with them. So there needs to be an approach. And I think it probably needs to be a healthcare-based approach that diverts those who are hooked to the opioids from that. At the same time, they've got to go after the drugs gangs. As I say, successive governments have never been able to solve this. I'm not sure what this government will do that will really make that much difference. at the end of the day, unless you go down the route that many people just don't want to even contemplate, which is to decriminalise drugs in total. But
exactly.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you very much. Thank you very much for whizzing us through that. Mark White, there, our Home and Security Editor as well.
The Conservative, because decriminalisation really sort of does seem to be what is an option, as you like to say. It's an option, but obviously that would not cut it with the Conservative Party base, who don't see it as tough on crime. And they have actually been quite critical of a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, we reported about Scotland taking a more public health approach to users of Class A drugs. The government have said they remain critical of that, and that it's tantamount to decriminalising Class A drugs, and that's definitely not a route they want to go down. But I think for me, regardless of what you do, people will always take drugs. And I know loads of people who, on the face of it, very functional, very regular people who are certainly not drug addicts, but who don't mind dabbling in illegal drugs. And I feel like there's a lot of those people in society, and the idea that they're willing to take that risk and take drugs recreationally. So, as Mark said there, I guess it's about sort of targeting that group of problem drug users, which are clearly the most in need.
Yeah, and as well, look, unless you end up getting to grips with the quote-unquote war on drugs and county lines and the violence that goes around it, if it looks as though, as I suspect we maybe are heading towards a situation where it looks like that problem just cannot be tackled, then ultimately the clamours for decriminalisation start to grow, don't they? But let's speak now to Anthony Hayne, who is the Head of Communications at Volte-Face, which is an advocacy organisation that seeks to reduce the harm that drugs pose to individuals and society, and secure a tap for the Labour campaign for drug policy reform. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. Well, look, we've had an overview there from Mark White there about what the policies are, essentially, what the plans are. What's your reaction to them?
So I'm pretty disappointed, to be honest. I think there was a really good opportunity for the government to make some really positive changes. As you pointed out, drug deaths are at an unprecedented level, year-on-year increases for 8 years. Instead, they've gone for the easy option, the supposedly tough-on-crime approach by putting out policies which frankly won't work, and I question the legality around. Can you take someone's passport away from them? I'm an Irishman, and can someone take my passport away? What's the diplomacy issues going to be there? I think there are some good things that have come off the back of this. Boosting treatment is fantastic, although it should also be said that it was the Tories in the first place that took that funding for treatment away. But looking up at Scotland, as you just mentioned, there's a really good opportunity to get a handle on this crisis, to genuinely undermine county line gangs. But instead, I think the Home Office and Number 10 have gone for the headlines, sadly.
Well, you call this the easy option, and some might say it's tokenistic, just to look as if they're being tough on crime. What do you think is the harder, more complex option, which I'm assuming by that you mean it would be more effective to go down? What is that solution then?
So I always point to the Portuguese model. Portugal has essentially decriminalised drugs for the last 20 years. They did that again because of a soaring drug crisis and a bloodborne virus from sharing needles. That's been highly, highly successful. The only reason we haven't followed through on that is because politicians refuse to follow the evidence base. They are terrified of the voter bases turning against them, when in reality all the evidence shows that this is the way to go. It is purely a political point-scoring sort of novel idea to talk about taking passports away, being tough.
Isn't there an argument, though, that when you decriminalise drugs, you make people who wouldn't take drugs just because they're illegal? And we had Peter Hitchens on earlier, in fact, and he said, look, drugs are illegal, I don't take them. There are lots of people who wouldn't necessarily be inclined to turn to hard drugs and become drug addicts, but would be more inclined to dabble in them and use them recreationally if they were illegal. Don't you just open up the sort of floodgates for drug use amongst that population?
I disagree. No, I think that the majority of people who use drugs problematically, so the thicker end of the wedge, sort of heroin, crack cocaine users, etc., tend to have complicated lives. They might be victims of adverse childhood trauma. They might have been abused. So I don't think those people are going to start picking up drugs because they are decriminalised. I think that if you do decriminalise something, you need to go and support the 1 in 10 who might become addicted to a substance. So as we talked about diversion earlier, so have drug treatment, good drug education, ensure there's a surrounding raft of measures that support those people who need help. But decriminalising these drugs will be a really positive step. Some people who will have died in the last year will not have called an ambulance because they are scared of the criminality of drugs.
Yes, OK. And look, who are we going after the right people here? Because some people would say, well, look, we really need to go and kind of cut the head off this snake, don't we? We need to go and get these gangs and get the leaders of these gangs, etc., etc., etc. Whereas actually, someone, I used an example before, I think of, this fictional bloke called Paul, who maybe works in middle management somewhere in Slough, once a year on his birthday or New Year's Eve, he dabbles a little bit and he gets caught. And then all of a sudden he's got a criminal record, possibly loses his job, possibly won't get another job, can't go to America, can't travel. The government takes his driving licence off him. Some people might be thinking, well, hang on a minute. If you walk down the street in Camden now, you could do it right now, lining that street are very obvious drug dealers.
Yes.
Are the police going after the right people? Or the government, I suppose?
No, they're absolutely not going after the right people, and you're absolutely correct. I think having a criminal record for a minor drug possession offence can really ruin people's lives as it is, and this will only exacerbate that issue. For example, HGV drivers. There's an enormous shortage of HGV drivers. If someone had a drug possession offence, not while they were going to be driving,
of course,
but say a week beforehand, then you're going to increase that problem even further. I just think it's a nonsensical idea that's not going to help anyone. So the reason that this strategy actually came to be is because of a really good report which was commissioned by the Home Office from Dame Carol Black. None of these suggestions have been implemented. They've just gone for the headlines. They've gone for what I think will work with Middle England. And I think they've got it wrong too. I think the public are far ahead of politicians when it comes to talking about issues related to drugs, particularly when you see cocaine being found in the Houses of Commons. It just really points to the fact that it's one rule for them and another rule for the rest of us. I highly doubt any minister's going to have their passport taken away from them, despite 8 of the last Conservative leader candidates admitting to using drugs.
Yes, well, we all remember that part of the campaign.
Thank you.
I do believe I think there was 32 recommendations in that report you speak of, and the government I think have said they've accepted 31 of them. Whether they'll be implemented, I suppose, is another question. But thank you for joining us, Anthony.
Nice
Hayne, head of communications at Volte-Face advocacy organisation, and secretariat as well for the Labour campaign for drug policy reform.
Well, there we go. Well, after the break, we'll be talking to the Safeguarding Alliance about what could have been done to save poor Arthur Lavinia Hughes and what has to be done now to prevent a similar case of cruelty from happening ever again. That's after this weather update.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. A spell of rain and, in some places, snow to come this afternoon, but followed on by bright spells and showers and a blustery breeze for all of us. That wind reaching gale force in the far northwest this afternoon as the rain clears eastwards. And in this part of the world, I think there's the risk of some snow falling for a time as the rain cools the atmosphere. Could even settle in 1 or 2 spots, but I don't think there'll be any widespread issues with that snow. And it does clear to bright spells and showers. Those showers on the heavy side with hail mixed in at lower levels. And again, some snow falling over the hills of Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The showers rattle through on a blustery breeze into the evening. But eventually overnight, the showers tend to ease away. The wind dies down as well. And under clear skies, temperatures fall away. A widespread frost as we begin things on Tuesday, with temperatures dipping to -1 to -3 Celsius in rural parts. But a bright start to the day ahead of this feature, which is a rapidly deepening low pressure during Monday and the first part of Tuesday. This is Storm Barra, named by Met Erin because of the strong wind impacts across the Republic of Ireland, but it's going to bring widespread wet and windy weather to much of the UK on Tuesday, starting off towards the southwest, those winds picking up, the rain pushing in during the morning, and in western areas the risk of 60 to 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts around exposed coasts. Snow for a time for Northern Ireland as well as that rain bumps into the colder air. But the more significant snow is expected across parts of Northern England and Scotland, where at lower levels there'll be some reasonable snow amounts, but over the hills 10 centimetres of snow is likely, along with blizzards, so some really treacherous conditions here. And as the strong winds move into Scotland and Northern Ireland as well as Northern England, the risk of disruption here in places. Wednesday stays unsettled with further rain and wind, turns quieter on Thursday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson is pledging to break up 2,000 county lines gangs. It's part of the government's £300 million drugs policy overhaul plan in England and Wales. Under the scheme to disrupt the rural trade in Class A narcotics, recreational users could face having their passports or their driving licences confiscated. The Education Secretary will make a statement to MPs later today about the consequences and the circumstances leading up to the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinho Hughes. A major government investigation is underway to look at safeguarding failings in the case. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life for his murder. His father, Thomas Hughes, was jailed for manslaughter. One of the inventors of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has warned future pandemics could be more lethal. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert says scientific advances made during the coronavirus pandemic must not be lost. She also warned that the Omicron variant may be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies. The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been jailed for 4 years for inciting dissent among the country's military rulers. She and her National League for Democracy party were removed from power in February in a coup. The ruling is the first in a series of cases brought against the 76-year-old. She's denied all charges. Yorkshire have confirmed Darren Gough as the county's new managing director of cricket. The former England international will be in post until the end of the 2022 season. His appointment comes after Azim Rafiq's allegations of institutional racism in the club. The club's chairman, Roger Hutton, and chief executive, Mark Arthur, both stood down following the claims. You're right up to date. I'll have more on all of today's top stories for you at 12 o'clock.
Good morning. Now, a national investigation has been launched into the murder of 6-year-old boy Arthur Labinjo Hughes. The boy from Solihull in the West Midlands was poisoned, starved and beaten by his father and his father's girlfriend until his murder in June last year. The investigation hopes to identify the lessons to be learned from Arthur's death for the benefit of other children elsewhere in England.
Yes, indeed. Well, the government has also commissioned an urgent inspection of the social care, health, police and probation services in Solihull, to whom Arthur was known, in order to upgrade an existing review.
Yes, while the CEO of the Safeguarding Alliance, Emily Constantis, is with us now to talk about this. Good morning, Emily. Obviously, incredibly tragic circumstances to be speaking under, but moving sort of away from the circumstances of Arthur's death and now to what the government is trying to do about it, what would you like to see for safeguarding processes to be improved?
Well, first of all, safeguarding will only work if we work together. And that is so true. We need to work together in safeguarding. It's not just about reviewing. We need to actually put in place practical measures to ensure that practitioners can join up and have further oversight. When we look at the very tragic case of Arthur, straight away, many practitioners will automatically be thinking of little Daniel Pelker, who lost his life in almost identical circumstances in 2012. He was starved, he was fed salt, and eventually died of a head injury. Again, where were the professionals? There was a review that took place then, but then 8 years later, we have almost identical circumstances with little Arthur. And I think the question needs to be, it's not just about continually reviewing practice when practice goes wrong. We need to put resources to actually proactively put in place measures to safeguard children. We need to stop reacting to the negatives and actually look what we're not doing to safeguard in the first place. And I really do feel it goes back to the disparity of provision across the country. Daniel Pelker was in Coventry, let's just say for argument's sake, less than an hour up the road from Arthur, in almost identical tragic circumstances. We need action, and we need action now. We need to stop having continuous reviews. We need to look at training. It's not just about a lack of funding, a lack of resources. We need to also identify why the resources we currently have in place aren't working.
Yeah, so well, indeed we do, because it can't keep happening, this kind of thing, can it? How does this actually happen, though? Do we need just more money pumped into social services, etc., child protection services? What's your take?
I don't believe it's just about pumping money. If we don't have a basic level and understanding of safeguarding, we can have the best systems in the world. What we need to look at is actually people's understanding of what safeguarding means in context. Are the thresholds too high?
Sorry to interrupt, just quickly, just because I think that's a really, really important point, that actually, because some people would say, look, absolutely, taking a child off their family, which essentially is what could end up happening, right, should be a last resort. I think we can all agree with that. But it can be quite tricky sometimes, can't it, for them to go in and necessarily, categorically determine whether or not a child has been abused or whether or not, something else is going on there. So how do we get around that?
When there is clear evidence that a child is at risk, Arthur had quite a significant bruise that many have seen through various media reports. He had stated he feels he doesn't feel safe. Who was listening to his voice? There were numerous professionals involved in this child, and actually it goes back to, again, that understanding of thresholds in context of the child's setting and the child's circumstances. We need to ensure that actually when a child is crying for help, that action is taken. We cannot wait when a child's life is at risk. And this is only going to stop happening if actually we are giving more powers to statutory authorities to act when they need to act, and take into consideration the voice of the young person in this.
And indeed, he had, I think, 130 bruises, as well as that significant bruise that you mentioned there. And that's the crux of all this. It's the repetitive, it's the failure on so many levels. And I just wonder why haven't the authorities, all these agencies in charge of safeguarding children, why has it taken them so long? I think we've lost her. I'm hoping we'll get her back. We'll try and get her back, and I'll put the question to her again.
There's a lot happening here, isn't there? There's the lack of joined-up thinking as well, which you seem to allude to before.
Yes.
If things are being reported to schools, things are being reported to social services, things are being reported to probation services, things are being reported to the police, and it starts to build a picture, doesn't it, really? And when that stuff starts to come from grandparents and from uncles and from, friends or teachers, there is that classic phrase, isn't there? There's no smoke without fire. Now, that's sometimes a bad phrase to use because sometimes there is, right? But in a case like this where you look at it in the round...
Yeah, exactly. And I do wonder... because so many of the solutions that would be obvious solutions, they're sort of authoritarian as well, because you don't want the government imposing itself on parents who are looking after their children perfectly fine, just for the sake of sort of catching out the few who aren't looking after their children. But sometimes, it might actually be a bit worth it. I remember Scotland tried to do a policy where each child born would have a sort of designated person who would be involved in that child's life, somebody from the state who would be involved in that child's life and make sure everything that was supposed to be happening for them was. And that was criticised for being authoritarian. But it does make me wonder, I mean, perhaps a solution like that might be the option.
Indeed. All right. Well, look, after the break, smaller businesses are preparing to hike prices over the Christmas period to combat shortages and rising costs. We're looking to report detailing this trend. That's after a short break.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, businesses have begun to sound the alarm over possible Christmas price rises, with companies feeling the strain of ongoing supply chain pressures. Prices have spiked by 0.3% over the month of November, the first such increase since May 2019. Families attempting to buy food for their Christmas celebrations will be hit as Yuletide staples such as Brussels sprouts and turkey become more expensive.
Well, while top retailers have attempted to hold back price increases for consumers in their stores, smaller businesses will struggle to absorb the inflationary shock. So, Vicky Price, economist and the former head of the government's economic service, joins us this morning. Thank you very much. So how's this really going to hit customers in their pocket? That's what most people want to know. They want to know how this kind of stuff is going to impact their own pockets?
Well, it will hit the pockets if indeed retailers are able to raise their prices. And as we've seen so far, they've been A, reluctant, and B, when they have raised prices, they've seen resistance. So what we've seen is that input costs have risen everywhere across the economy. The manufacturing sector has been badly hit. The services sector has been badly hit, not just because of shortages and prices of transferring goods from wherever they're coming from becoming more expensive because of shipping costs, but also individual supply chain issues. And then, of course, staff costs, which have affected everyone. The interesting thing is that so far, the only sector of the economy that has been able to raise prices and get away with it has been the manufacturing sector. The services sector has been much less able to do it because the consumer cannot do it themselves. Yes, we've seen some increases in wages taking place in some sectors, but not everywhere. But then inflation has come in all sorts of different ways, like higher energy prices, for example, high fuel costs, which therefore mean that what is left in the pockets of people is considerably reduced.
And what do you think the government, if anything, should be doing about this? Because some people might say, well, you forced us into this lockdown, you forced us to put our lives on hold. That's had an impact on, how much money we have now. I know a lot of the other reasons are beyond the government's control, but shouldn't the government be helping the most struggling families?
There is a certain amount that has been put aside for people at the lower end of the pay scale and those with hardship, if you like, in terms of being able to afford the goods that they need to have. That includes, of course, payments for covering part of the fuel costs. But of course, we've seen the takeaway, if you like, the taking away of the extra money under universal credit, which of course would have been quite helpful. On the other hand, you had minimum wage coming up. So although it's not happening for a bit. So what you've got is a combination of factors which perhaps are balancing things out a little bit for the time being. But if prices start rising, then in the shops and for their normal goods, and we're talking about Christmas, turkeys, etc., then that's going to be a real problem. What can the government do? Well, we can't go back to price controls because we've seen what's happening with energy suppliers. They're all disappearing from the market. There is a limit to how you can do that. One has to just hope that the pressures in the international markets ease off a bit. But I'm afraid in the UK particularly, it's become pretty bad on the staff shortage front because of Brexit and so on. So they're going to have to raise prices if businesses are going to remain in business, because we've seen so many firms in serious financial strain. Then they're going to have to raise the prices and see what happens, basically.
Yeah, but I think most people now are looking at their lives in the round, frankly, and seeing the cost of living going up left, right and centre, and concerned that simply now they might not really be able to afford to live, especially if you've got young children, for example. It's not just one thing, is it? It's not just maybe the price of your food's potentially going up. It's your energy as well on top of that. It's your wage not going up anywhere, like in line with inflation. I mean, we're in trouble here, aren't we? Your average man and woman on the street is going to find it quite hard to afford the cost of living, aren't they?
You're right. And of course, if you look at any forecast of consumption ahead, you'll see that there is a problem because real disposable incomes, if you also add to this the tax increases that are taking place, the national insurance contribution increase, but also, of course, the fact that you get into the higher tax brackets much more easily because basically the allowances have been frozen, the thresholds for tax. So many more people, millions more actually entering the higher tax bracket. But at least you could say they are the lucky ones to be earning that much. Many people have not been able to save during the lockdown. Many have, so there is still plenty of money around saved, but not equally distributed across the economy. So we really need to worry about people at the lower end of the pay scale and those who have had difficulty finding jobs once the market reopened. But even those who are going back to jobs, quite a lot of them are going to low pay areas as they did before. And yes, minimum wage is going up, and yes, that will benefit them up to a point. But until they get the full benefit of that, and until they're safe in their jobs, I think they're going to be very cautious. So the expectation is that people will not spend anything like as much as we'd like them to, given the savings that have been made. They will worry about the future, and retailers are going to find it hard. And many firms are wondering what will happen if there are more restrictions and if interest rates go up, and what will happen to their costs and the extra borrowing that they have taken in themselves over the pandemic.
Well, Vicky Price, we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on to speak to us about that.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, it's a scary state of affairs, really. I think people are getting hit in the pocket, and it is really starting to have a massive, massive impact on them. And Tesco shoppers as well, in many parts of the UK, may face empty shelves in the run up to Christmas, as logistics workers apparently are going to go on strike over pay, exactly when you didn't need them to do it, obviously. Tesco offered the workers just a 4% pay increase, which is well below the current inflation rate. And I suspect that we might be seeing quite a bit of this going on at the moment, which is that people's pay packets, frankly, are not matching the increase in inflation and the increase in the price of goods.
Yes, and the workers who are striking include warehouse and HGV drivers based at 4 of Tesco's depots, who will vote for pre-Christmas strikes unless firms offer to keep up with inflation. The strikes are due to take place predominantly on the 20th of December and last for 5 days into that pre-Christmas and Christmas period. So is Tesco open on Christmas Day anyway?
I'm sure some will, but I don't know. some places are, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, the workers have already been warned that they could lose their annual bonus or actually be sacked if they go on strike. So one to watch there. We'll have to see what Tesco responds before that. They've got about 3 weeks, I suppose, 2 weeks.
To come up with a solution. Yes. It's a tricky one. I'll say I'm on the fence about strike action. I think it depends what line of work you're working in, of course. But, you know, it is a tricky one. They obviously strikes are timed, aren't they, to cause maximum disruption and maximum impact and therefore increase the likelihood, potentially, of what they actually want to achieve. But I'm just not sure, you know, realistically, ruining people's Christmases as well, potentially.
I do wonder, I mean, how late? I think 20th is a bit late in the day if you're trying to impact Christmas. Do people do their Christmas shopping well into the final week?
Not necessarily at Tesco.
I suppose, I reckon you're quite a last-minute man.
Well, last minute, maybe, but I mean, Tesco's is food, isn't it? So, I mean, I'm not, you know, that's the difference. It's not like I'm banging trouble if I'm going to Tesco's to try and find my mum a Christmas present. You know, really.
They do decent things as well.
Yeah.
Gifts.
What, like a potted plant? Maybe they do. Hey, why not? I'm sure they probably do. Don't come at me. Anyway, right, so the UK now has taken part in a naval exercise to counter emerging threats. This is obviously a naval exercise with France.
Yes, our waters can be challenged by submarines, cyber and space attacks, migration and even, of course, war, ultimately. Forces from 5 allied countries, including the UK and France, took part in what has been described as one of the biggest and most unique naval exercises in recent times.
The 2-week exercise was called Polaris 21. Well, David Lees is an expert in French politics at the University of Warwick. Joins us now. Thank you very much. So, are you concerned, really, about recent reports suggesting that Russia is planning to invade the Ukraine? And do you think this is a part of what we're seeing there?
Very much so, I think, yeah. I mean, in terms of France and Britain have a long history of working together for naval collaboration and indeed military collaboration, going back really most recently to when Nicolas Sarkozy was president of France and David Cameron was the UK Prime Minister. And both countries have worked very closely, despite recent misgivings over a whole variety of different issues and migrant crises and so on. The navies of the two countries have worked very closely for a number of years now. So I think it shows a real sense of Franco-British unity, rare Franco-British unity actually, in terms of this perceived threat or potential threat from Russia and China in particular. We saw, of course, recently the head of the British MI6 come out and be quite clear about the threat, particularly from Russia and China posed by hackers and so on. So I think it's a really good opportunity for the kind of Western European and Northern European nations to show that they are prepared to stand up to that threat. And although we may disagree politically at the moment in a number of areas, the UK government and the French government, particularly around the migrant crisis, it's good to see that actually when it comes to the security of the two countries, they are willing to work together.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you, actually, because France, the cooperation between France and the UK has been in the news recently for all the wrong reasons. They haven't been collaborating or have been collaborating quite badly. And many people will say, well, if they can't even collaborate to solve a relatively less complicated issue than global warfare, can they really join together to tackle the likes of emerging superpowers?
It's a very good question that you ask, and I think it's an interesting one, really. As I say, I think particularly with France, as we know, France is going towards the presidential and national elections next year. So there's a kind of period of potential instability while Emmanuel Macron seeks re-election. So there's a kind of a likelihood there that internally, domestically at least, that France it obviously has an eye, in terms of the government, has an eye on that election, and very clearly Emmanuel Macron does. When it comes to the UK, it's slightly more stable, clearly, in terms of the current government. But as you say, there's certainly the real issue in terms of the wider political solutions to ongoing crises, particularly around the fallout from Brexit, ongoing fallout from Brexit, and also the migrant crisis. But the wider issue, I think, around international security, particularly when it comes to things like cyber security, I'm actually more confident, really, that's likely to be more successful. I think both governments and indeed the EU and other partners, including NATO, really recognise that's a need to protect domestic and international security. So I'd be less worried about that. But I do think in terms of France as a whole, we've got to keep an eye on how relations continue to develop.
Yeah, David, just quickly, because we're a little bit pressed for time, sorry to rush you, but people did say that, in the post-Brexit world, we were going to have less cooperation with France and potentially that could impact our national security. Does it look like that's the case at the moment? I mean, we're seeing joint military exercises, aren't we?
Absolutely, I don't think it's the case at all, really, clearly. For all of the kind of talk around, the recent migrant issues, I actually think, in reality, they are, both governments are seeking to work together. There might be obvious differences, but actually, when it comes to it, it's in both countries' interest to work together. So I don't think that's true. I think, ultimately, of all the things in terms of what we were told about pre-Brexit, this is something which hasn't happened, which I think is good news for us living in the UK. When I was last on this programme, I was talking about the influence France has, over the UK, particularly in terms of trade networks and so on. And it's important we acknowledge that. We acknowledge France is our closest trading partner, really, in terms of proximity geographically. So it's good to see that hasn't actually been something that's come true.
Well, David Lees, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yes, good stuff. Obviously, an expert in French politics at the University of Warwick. They're just reacting to these joint military exercises. Make the most of it while it lasts, ladies and gentlemen, I reckon. But reaction in the inbox now. GBviews at gbnews.uk to what we were talking about before, about potential Tesco strike, potential rising cost of goods, and frankly, the cost of living in general. I bet it's a nightmare now for young families. And this is from Paul. I only have myself to care for. My boy is grown up, but I reckon it's never been as bad for young families. And I think this is a big issue because it's everything, isn't it? It's the fuel, it's the electricity, it's your energy. All of that stuff is going up.
Yeah, I suppose the government will say and have said that because they've reduced the taper on universal credit, so people will be keeping more of their universal credit as they start to work. And the government will say they are helping families, but it's clearly not enough, is it, to counter all the... They're being hit from every direction with rising costs.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, just very quickly, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who has been getting in touch in our inbox. We did spend a rather large chunk of this show discussing, obviously, the poor case of that little boy, Arthur, who was murdered. And I think one thing I will say is that throughout everything that's come through the inbox today, the outpouring of love and emotion and the potential solutions people are putting forward and that people wanting whole life terms and people want more money in social services does show actually that, frankly, out of something so devastating, the truth is that the vast majority of people in this country and indeed who watch this programme are clearly just incredible human beings, and the outpouring of love for that little lad has been quite emotional to see actually as well.
Yeah, and thank you for all those views. And we're nearly at the end of the programme.
We are. We'll be back again tomorrow.
Shall we cram in a couple more views?
Oh, OK, we've got time for a couple more views apparently. There we go.
Our audience.
Right, fantastic. Well, there we go. Yes, people getting in touch to say as well about staff shortages and that basically people are saying that Tesco shouldn't go on strike. We've already had a year of people with their lives turned upside down as a result of lockdown. People saying, hey, look, come on, it won't reflect well on the company if they go on strike, and that stops people getting the food they want this Christmas.
Yes.
Well,
very well done.
Anyway, right, that's it from us here on To The Point. But don't go away, because up next is the briefing with the wonderful Gloria Di Piero. We will be back tomorrow, 9:30. Be there.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. A spell of rain and, in some places, snow to come this afternoon, but followed on by bright spells and showers and a blustery breeze for all of us. That wind reaching gale force in the far northwest this afternoon as the rain clears eastwards. And in this part of the world, I think there's the risk of some snow falling for a time as the rain cools the atmosphere. could even settle in 1 or 2 spots, but I don't think there'll be any widespread issues with that snow. And it does clear to bright spells and showers. Those showers on the heavy side with hail mixed in at lower levels, and again some snow falling over the hills of Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The showers rattle through on a blustery breeze into the evening, but eventually overnight the showers tend to ease away. The wind dies down as well, and under clear skies temperatures fall away. A widespread frost as we begin things on Tuesday, with temperatures dipping to -1 to -3 Celsius in rural parts. But a bright start to the day ahead of this feature, which is a rapidly deepening low pressure during Monday and the first part of Tuesday. This is Storm Barra, named by Met Erin because of the strong wind impacts across the Republic of Ireland. But it's going to bring widespread wet and windy weather to much of the UK on Tuesday, starting off towards the southwest. Those winds picking up, the rain pushing in during the morning. And in western areas, the risk of 60 to 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts around exposed coasts. Snow for a time for Northern Ireland, as well as that rain bumps